On today's episode, we're doing science. So this is going to be a carburetor episode. Woo! And, since it's freezing cold outside, we're going to do some carburetor science. So this is sat outside in the cold all day. So before we do anything, we're going to see. Okay, the carburetor bowl is 30 degrees. Okay, everything under here should be the same temperature, 30 degrees. So what I'm hoping to show here is why performance built carbureted engines are so grumpy when it's cold outside, and they take a long time to warm up and run right. Because this thing, pretty much the way I have it now, when the engine gets up to 180 degrees or so, it runs beautifully. I'm not going to say perfect, but probably about as good as an average guy can get a carburetor to be. I'm going to set the choke and fire it up, and we're going to check some temperatures while it's running. That's also what makes it run crappy when it's cold outside until it gets warmed up. So 17 degrees now. Where the choke has come off and it doesn't want to idle very well. Okay, I don't know if you're able to hear me very good out there because the truck's loud, but the coldest that I saw on my little IR thermometer was about 10 degrees on the intake runners, maybe a minute after I started it, and everything outside is about 30 degrees. So why is now the intake manifold runner 10 degrees? Well, because when it draws air and fuel through the carburetor, it cools off the air charge. That's why carburetors make more power usually. With a carburetor, it's cold-blooded. It doesn't like to idle and run very well, pick up fuel until it gets warmed up. Duh, right? But what really sent me on a path to figure out why is on my 77 F-150, which if you go way back, some of the first videos on the channel were that truck, I put a throttle body injection unit on it, and guess what? It kind of did the same thing. So I started doing research on why this happens, and basically what I found and what makes sense to me, and I think is supported by what we just did there, liquids don't like to atomize when they're cold, and gasoline is no different. And what happens is, instead of all the fuel that's going through the carburetor making it into the cylinder, all the air makes it in, because right, why would the air care? But not all the fuel does. And what happens when it's cold is it falls out of suspension and it sticks to the walls of the intake manifold. So it actually causes your motor to run lean, because the carburetor's dumping plenty of fuel in there, but it ain't getting into the cylinder. It's not a problem that's just unique to carburetors. EFI, a throttle body EFI unit will have the same problems. So what are we going to do about it on this truck? I'm not sure. We might try experimenting with some fuel heater, carb plate heater kind of stuff, or I'll show you what it's like when it gets warmed up, because it runs totally fine once it's warmed up all the way. Okay, just got done hauling a car on the car trailer. Fully warmed up. This thing runs great. This is just cruising through town in third gear. Flatbed trailer. So I'm definitely not saying that you can't tune that out with throttle body EFI. It's just that the fuel sticking to the intake runner walls is still an issue with throttle body fuel injection. And you have to tune around that, which what that means is you have to put a bunch more fuel in it when it's cold like that, so that with the fuel sticking to the cylinder walls, there's still enough fuel that makes it into the cylinder to get the right mixture. So that's kind of the workaround, which you can't do with a carburetor because it doesn't have that capability. OEMs did all kinds of weird stuff to deal with that too. They had like a heater sandwiched between the carburetor and the intake with coolant running through it. Okay, so what's the best way to deal with this? Well, the very best way would be port fuel injection and a lot of tuning. The next best way would probably be a throttle body EFI setup with a fair amount of tuning to overcome that issue. So the only thing you can really do with the carburetor is set it up a little richer in the wintertime and or make the engine warm up faster. It's a tough one for me because, man, when this thing gets up to operating temperature, it runs great. I mean, a carburetor will never be like fuel injection, but there's just a joy that comes from a well-tuned carburetor and how responsive it is. That's the dragon I'm chasing anyway. And I kind of felt it on my Fat Boy, you know? There's a great sense of reward that comes from really dialing in a carburetor. So my Harley Fat Boy has had aftermarket pipes on it, presumably since new. And was, you know, tuned for it. Well, no. I mean, it ran okay. But even better than okay, it ran pretty good. just knew that there was some left on the table. I ended up going up on the main jet size like 3 sizes, and of course adjusting the idle mix screw on it, and man, it feels like it picked up 20 horsepower on the top end, like, and it just runs great. Anyway, heading back to the house after lunch, so let's go talk about carburetor basics. And you guys let me know what you think I should do. Want to see me try to make this carburetor work in the cold weather and everything? Or do you want to see me try some kind of throttle body EFI or even port injection? My top pick, if budget and stuff were not a concern, would be port fuel injection. Here's your standard issue Holley 4150 carburetor. This one is a manual choke, mechanical secondary. So the only difference here is instead of having a plastic choke cap with the heater and a bimetallic spring on this side, it just has linkage. This is a little different than the one that's on the big block, but really in function, it is largely the same. So the choke is on the primary side of the carburetor. So when I talk about primary side, that means the front bowl and metering and butterflies, throttle blades. So here, throttle blades, you can see primary side, you get quite a bit of movement before the secondary side starts to open, even on a mechanical secondary. So that's what you're driving around on. Low throttle cruise is all this here. The secondary doesn't really come into play until about past 2/3 throttle or so. Like if you watch still, so that's a little past halfway, and the secondary is just starting to open. So for the most part, that's heavy throttle to wide open throttle. Now, some stuff on the outside, you don't need much to take one of these apart. A 5/8 flat blade screwdriver, and sometimes a quarter or a 5/16 nut driver, screwdriver, wrench, whatever, for the bowl screws. This one is a little older, so they're actually just flatheads. But here is the needle and seat adjustment. So you can see the sight glass here. You want the fuel level to be right at the bottom of that, so you can just see it in there, and if you shake the truck, a little bit dribbles out. If you take the screw out and it pours out of there, that's too much. If you can't see it, that's not enough. So what you do is move the needle and seat right here. So you, oh man, I've never torn this carburetor apart, and I've had it on the shelf for years. So you break the flathead loose, and then what you do to lower the float level, you tighten, basically hold the flathead, tighten that down, and that shoves the needle down farther into the bowl. Or if your float level's too low, you loosen. So same on the rear. There we go. Now there's, okay. So if you take that out of there, there's just an O-ring, the thread's on the top. This is your needle and seat right here, which basically is the toilet bowl valve of the carburetor. So when it drops down, it lets fuel comes in from the side and down. So when the needle is dropped down, when the float is down, fuel comes in. When the bowl fills up and lifts it up just like a toilet bowl, the little needle seats in there and shuts off fuel flow. Okay, so this is a Holley 4150 style carburetor because it has front and rear metering blocks. If it only had a front metering block and no rear, it would be a 4160. which are decent budget carburetors. I've ran those before, but these are more tunable. This one also only has front idle mixture screws. You can see there's none in the back, so that would be a 2-corner idle, not a 4-corner. There are idle circuits in the rear, they're just not adjustable. Okay, they do get stuck on there, so once you have all the screws out, just, oh boy, that boy has been on there a while. Gonna have to step up our game here. Oh, yeah, she glued. She is glued on there. Okay. So there's the float, the needle and seat down in there. So this is the front metering block. Here are the primary jets. That is the power valve. I have an actual carburetor jet tool. Don't know where it is right now. But those are definitely worth the money. So when I'm changing the primary jets, that's these guys right here. So 67s are what are in the primary. This is all full of fuel, of course, and these are the jets. So as you get through the transition circuit and into the main circuit, fuel comes in through the jets here, goes through all these emulsion tubes, which is actually, so on the main jet it comes up here and goes and comes out the booster right there and atomizes as the engine draws it in. Okay, well, that's going to take some time and possibly soaking in something to get that to come off without breaking anything. So anyway, there's the power valve. You have to experiment with it because that is enrichment as you get into the throttle, but not to take the place of the accelerator pump, which the discharge nozzle is there. You can see that one a lot better. Those you change to a bigger diameter to get more fuel flow faster. The rear is pretty much identical to this, other than it does not have a power valve on these. Your secondaries are almost always bigger jets because of not having a power valve. So what happens with the power valve, with whatever vacuum rating it's rated at, say it's a 6.5, which this probably is because that's what they almost all come with, this will open at 6.5 inches of vacuum and richen the main circuit. See what I got here. So there's a 6.5. That's what comes in most Hollies. And I usually end up taking them out because I guess my engines are lame and they don't they make too much vacuum. Oh, that one's a 25. What the heck is that from? Anyway, that's how they're marked, and that's what the rest of the power valve going in from the backside looks like. Now, the rule of thumb for starting out, what you would pick, half of your hot idle vacuum. So if you're idling at 16 inches of vacuum, you'd go with an 8.5. They're all half sizes. Or 2 inches lower than your lowest cruising vacuum. Okay, I showed you the accelerator pump discharge nozzle, but there's also the pump cam, these plastic guys here on the secondary, and this one on the primary. That tab on this linkage rides against that cam. So as you open the throttle, that pushes that tab right there up, which then pushes down by this spring on the pump arm lever. And these smaller size carburetors all come with, I believe they're 30 cc, Accelerator pumps, you can get a 50cc, which will have a deeper bowl on it. I've never had to do that. Anyway, you can change those pump cams. Like here's a blue one, here's a pink one, orange. You can find charts online that tell you the order of the sizes, because it's really hard to tell by looking at them, because they have different ramps also, and the screw holes are in different positions. I realized you couldn't see the idle circuit very good. Let's flip this guy all the way upside down. So this is where your idle air and fuel mixture comes through. That's what your screws adjust. Now this down here is the transition slot, which you want to be a square at idle on the primaries. Otherwise what happens is you end up stealing too much fuel from it, and then you'll have a lean tip-in issue. Those are what you're on at idle and light throttle. As you get into the throttle, you get into the transition circuit, which the only way you can really tune it differently from the idle circuit is by changing the air bleeds. So that way you could have possibly keep the idle the same and richen up the transition circuit. So then on fast acceleration, you get into accelerator pumps. And on less acceleration, or kind of a gradually added load, like you come to a hill, pulling a pretty good hill in high gear, that's when your power valve comes into play. So those are all the circuits. But there is overlap, is what I would say. There's overlap between the circuits. You're never just in one of them. So just take that into account, because sometimes when you're trying to dial in your main jets, you might be cruising not on the main jets. You might be cruising on the idle and transition circuit like I was. If you're doing anything in here, especially on a big lifted pickup, it pays to just take the carburetor off, because I have spent more time on my knees on top of the radiator, leaned over the carburetor, changing accelerator pump nozzles and stuff than I care to admit. So now I'm at the point where if I'm going into there and doing that stuff, or if I'm taking the rear bowl off, I just pull the carburetor off, because seriously, it takes like 5 minutes. Save your back. So now I'm going to take you to me from 2 months ago that was doing the warmish fall weather dial in on this thing. And I mean, I only obviously filmed a fraction of it, but it's a lot of test driving, making changes, test driving, making changes. It's just like, that's why nobody can tell you what all the parts in the carburetor for your particular combo, because you just gotta, that's a journey that you and your vacuum gauge and your AFR gauge have to go on your own. Okay, take it back to Josh 2 months ago. Here you go. So here's my vacuum gauge. Engine's warm already, so we're gonna hook it to manifold vacuum. As I'm running, I backed these out and the idle picked up. So that's how I know it needs adjusted. So you turn them all the way until they seat. Don't like full ramrod them. So, and then back it out. There's a half, 1 and a half, 2. Oh, back a little bit. Okay, so half, 1 and a half, 2. Clear it out. them all out 2 turns, used a vacuum gauge, screwed them in a 1/4 turn at a time, and watched the vacuum to the highest vacuum. And then when you're doing a 1/4 turn, and as you're getting close, you can even go 1/8 of a turn instead. When you're getting close, you watch the vacuum, and when it just drops a little bit after you've made a turn, then you put that back. And you either leave them all there or you put it back to the highest vacuum and then back them all out 1/8 to a 1/4 of a turn. Richer. So you are setting for the highest idle vacuum, but there also is, it does affect just off idle as you're getting into the throttle. And with this thing, as I found out when I took it on the trip, it has so much torque and a higher gear with the tall tires that you are like cruising down the highway at 75, you are in and out of the idle circuit a lot of the time. Normally you're into the throttle enough that you're going off of your main jets and your power valve depending on the load. To show you real quick, highest idle vacuum is what we tune for. Your carbureted big block does not want to idle at 14.7 to 1. So this is it's upper 11s at idle. That's pretty fat. That's where it wants to be. How do you know which circuit you're in on the carburetor when you're looking at your instruments? Well, usually by how much vacuum you're making, and also kind of by your RPMs. So I know that when I'm around about 15 inches, very light throttle, that I'm in the idle circuit still. Okay, here's an interesting data point. I'm cruising at very light throttle at about 45, about 14 inches of vacuum, so I'm probably just getting into the transition circuit, and I'm in the 16s and sometimes the 17s on AFR. That's too lean, even though it's a little bit too rich at idle. Rant here for a minute also and say that everybody who says they're putting fuel injection on their rig to make it more reliable, that was not my experience whatsoever. And I'm talking aftermarket throttle body EFI setups. There are few things more reliable than a carburetor. It is a dumb mechanical computer. There's not a whole lot to go wrong as long as you don't let them set with bad fuel in them. I mean, they will go a lot of miles, and they're very predictable. Now, the aftermarket fuel injection does make it more tunable, because a carburetor can't adapt for temperature and altitude changes like fuel injection can. But more reliable? Hell no. Hell no. Okay, real quick while I'm doing this, here's my Brawler 750, which ended up being way too rich in stock configuration. We'll talk about why. But right now what I'm addressing is lack of fast idle. So here's a couple things. I put a longer screw in, but I put it right about to where the old one was. So that's about how much I had sticking out on the old one, but there was no adjustment left. And now I should have plenty. I might not have even needed to do that, because you can kind of see where the throttle blades used to be. These are the secondaries, and how much further open they are. Try to show you. So right up at the top under the throttle blade, see the square little port? That is the transition fuel circuit. So those should be a square, definitely on your primaries. And if you don't have enough idle speed without, you end up having this, if you don't have enough idle speed without cranking this too far to where that becomes a rectangle, then you go ahead and open the secondaries up using this screw here, which is difficult because you kind of have to guess, because you can't get to that when it's on the truck. Maybe with a little bit driver and a weird tool that you make, but for practical purposes, you adjust it while the carburetor's off. So I also went down 2 sizes on the rear jets because it's pretty rich at wide open throttle. It was like in the 11s, I think, and we would want to be like upper 12s, anywhere from 12.5 to 12.8, I would say, would be pretty good. So also keep track of everything, okay? And as you change, update. Here's my Holly jet assortment. I have 68s now in the primaries, which I think are going to be good. They might need to go down 1 or 2 more sizes. I changed to a 7.5 power valve up from a 6.5 because this engine makes more vacuum than this carburetor was really had in mind when they set it up. And my rear jets were a 76, dropped them down to a 74. Idle mixture screws are all at 3/4 of a turn out. Which, interestingly enough, that's what they set those at from the factory. Okay, just kidding, take 2. That washer that was part of the head of the screw was too thick, so I ground it down and we'll try again. See if we can drop this thing about 5 more times. That's good for it. Just gotta remind it who's boss. Oh, somebody's new house is getting delivered. Hang on, you guys got to see this. You get these on here before I lose them. Don't want to lose your nuts. I mean, unless you're trying to get promoted to admin in police work, then you should lose your nuts, because that's how you fast track. Anyway. What in the devil? I have never seen it. Is there a house missing over there now? Or are they delivering it? If you know, you know. Changing jets in the vehicle. Is it easier just to yank the carb off? Well, it depends on your vehicle and what all you're changing. Okay, here's a tech tip I just figured out. So changing air bleeds and accelerator pump squirters is a special sort of hell when you have the choke flapper in the way, especially when it's on the vehicle. In fact, I wonder if, like in hell, that's not an assignment. You have to forever change air bleeds and accelerator pump nozzles, like on a lifted truck, kneeling on the radiator, and you keep dropping them down in there and having to fish them back out. I could see that being a thing. Anyway, though, here's my tech tip. I do some fabrication, so I always have MIG and TIG rod. I made this little piece of 30,000th MIG wire with a little bend at the end. I probably can't show you this. Okay. So what I do to fish this air bleed in there is I stick the end of my wire right in the hole it goes in, and then you can just drop the jet down there, and you kind of can use the wire to finagle it until it's lined up with the threads, and you can get a screwdriver started. Okay, homemade 63-ish air bleeds are in there. All I had at the local speed shop was a bag of blanks, which is this AED part number. You just drill them to whatever size you need. I wanted to do 60 or 55. I don't have any drill bits that small. A 16th inch drill bit was the smallest I had. So this is what we have now. Still 68 primary jets, 8.5 power valve, 70s in the rear. Idle mixture screws are 3/4 of a turn out. And now we have 63 low speed air bleeds in the front. And here are the 70s that I took out. And they go right there. Outside is low speed, inside is the high speed air bleed. You can tell because the high speed ones are really small. I also took out the 35 squirter that I had put in there that was too big and went back to a 31. So hopefully the idle air bleed change fixes the dead spot off idle, the lean spot, and then might still need to change the squirter, but I'm starting back over at stock because I changed more than one thing at a time, which I still did, but don't do that. Change one thing at a time. It's a pain in the ass though. So you will see me tuning with a vacuum gauge and an AFR gauge in this video, and they're great. They're great. They're tools, but the thing about tools is you have to know how to interpret them. So the AFR gauge, I guess my advice about that to kind of avoid trouble is don't chase a number on that thing. Don't use the air fuel gauge to tell you there's a problem. Use the air fuel gauge to tell you what the problem you're having is, if that makes sense. Don't drive around and stare at the gauge and like, that's not the number I want. At steady cruise is the only time you should be doing that, when you're dialing in your main jets, because they could be really pretty fat or really pretty lean at a steady throttle, and you wouldn't notice if you didn't have the gauge, other than reading your spark plugs. Yeah, use the gauge to your advantage. See where you have a lean spot or a bog, and then you look at the gauge to see what it's doing. But you still have to know what you're doing and how to interpret it, because you can go way far the wrong way down a rabbit hole by not understanding why things are happening on the gauge. So that's the best advice I could give you. Don't tune to a number, and use the AFR gauge as a tool, but sometimes take it with a grain of salt. I'm going to give you my settings now. This isn't a cheat code. It's just a point of reference, okay? This is where I've ended up so far on this, with maybe still a little bit of tuning to go. So my final, I have 68 jets in the primary, 70 in the secondary. My idle air bleeds on the primaries, I ended up changing to a 0.565. So that's weird, right? Why is it not like a 55? Well, that's the closest drill bit that I could get to a 55. I just got a micro drill bit set from Harbor Freight, which is somewhere. And I ended up with an 8.5 on the power valve, 35 squirters front and rear, and a pink cam on the secondary squirter, and a green one on the primary. So there you go. That's what my settings are on this right now to get it running pretty dang good. So your mileage may vary. It's like I said, it all depends on how hard your engine sucks on that carburetor. Okay, thank you all so much for watching. If I said anything like wrong in the video, let me know in the comments. I mean, I'm not the expert. I've been doing it for a while. I feel like I'm pretty decent at it. And if we don't teach other people these things and pass them on, they get lost, because carburetors already are becoming a lost art. So I feel like the age that I'm at, I'm kind of like between a generation. I kind of grew up with 1 foot in the carburetor generation and 1 foot in the EFI generation. I'm not super good at either of those things, but I'm pretty decent at both of them, if that makes sense. So anyway, as always, it's just having fun with cars, so don't take it too seriously. Don't get bent out of shape. See you on the next one. Okay, this baby is stone cold like Steve Austin. See that? Nothing. If you have like a performance carburetor like this Brawler, don't do the Chevy guy stomp where you stomp the accelerator pedal like 47 times. You'll just flood the bejesus out of it. So I'll show you how to start a performance carburetor and a at least mild performance-ish engine. Okay, neutral, and I'm going to push this down just enough to hear the choke click all the way. Then you let off. Fuel pump noises. Oh, still flooded. Come on, baby. Ooh, still a little rough. I'm gonna give it just a little